Welcome, bienvenue, Watguanyo Radu, to Teach, Learn, Share, a podcast that thoughtfully explores teaching and learning practices in higher ed. I am Jasmine Parent, a learning technology consultant at Teaching and Learning Services at McGill University. I'm joined today by my co-host for this podcast series, Dr. Carolyn Samuel, the Associate Director of Faculty and Teaching Development at Teaching and Learning Services, where we work.
Hi, Jasmine, and hi, everybody who's tuning into the podcast. We're happy to have you back. I think it would be helpful to remind everyone what this podcast series is about. So in this series, we are talking about course design with sustainability in mind. It would also be helpful probably to remind everyone about the 3 pillars of sustainability. So when we're talking about sustainability, we're thinking about environmental sustainability, economic sustainability, and social sustainability. Today's podcast focuses on one of those 3 pillars, social sustainability. The social aspect of sustainability takes into consideration, among other things, human welfare and workplace atmosphere.
Thanks, Carolyn. So what does this mean in today's higher ed context? It means considering the mental health and well-being of both students and instructors. We've talked about students' well-being in other series of this podcast, but we're going to be focusing on instructors and more specifically on course design itself. Our listeners might be wondering what relevance social sustainability has to course design because there might not be a super obvious connection there.
Designing or redesigning a course can be incredibly time-consuming. Though it might be intellectually enriching work and enjoyable work, still, it's all time. The workload can be unsustainable. With that in mind, today, we'd like to talk about strategies for making work involved in course design or course redesign manageable. In other words, we'd like to talk about how to make course design, the activity itself or the process itself, a sustainable activity. That's our connection between the social pillar of sustainability and course design.
Yes, so we spoke with Cristina Carnemola, the professor who designed the Hispanic literature course, and she said that while she hopes students enjoy the format of the course, she needs the course to be sustainable for her in terms of the grading workload. And how instructors plan assessment tasks is part of course design.
Yeah, that's right.
And if we remember Anna Wong, the grad student who redesigned a course for engineering students with Professor Daniele Malomo, she also offered what we thought was excellent advice to instructors for doing course design. She suggested that instructors check in with themselves and their students because sustainability also includes the instructor's ability to lead and maintain a course in a healthy way. And beyond the folks that we spoke to within the podcast series, this is something that we come across quite often when we're working with faculty, just finding that balance between good course design and managing workloads in the moment, but also for the future.
Yeah, managing workload. That ties into social sustainability. It's an important consideration. So we thought it would be interesting to have a conversation with an instructor who intentionally builds strategies into her course design that support social sustainability. Jasmine, perhaps you can introduce our guest and then we'll get the conversation underway.
Yes, absolutely. So our guest today is Tatiana Lamoureux Gauvin. Tatiana is a faculty lecturer at McGill's Des Hôtels Faculty of Management, where she teaches various organizational behavior courses. She has a BA in psychology and management from McGill and an MSc in organizational development from HEC Montréal. Tatiana is also an active member of the Ordre de conseillers en ressources humaines agréés du Québec. Tatiana is really passionate about teaching, and we know this from having worked with her on course design. She is also a member of a team that works to enhance EDI in the faculty's curriculum and teaching practices. Tatiana, thank you so much for being here with us today.
It's really my pleasure. I've listened to the podcast, a couple episodes, actually all of them, and I'm a big fan. So I'm really happy to be here today.
Oh, we appreciate that feedback, Tatiana. Thank you so much. Today, we know you'll be sharing some strategies with us. And Jasmine, I know you have some thoughts to share as well, because you've had all kinds of experience helping instructors design learning technologies into their courses with workload efficiencies in mind. I thought we'd frame the strategies as advice for instructors, and then the two of you can give examples of how that advice can be implemented. How does that sound?
That sounds great.
All right. We're going to offer 4 pieces of advice. Our first piece of advice is to keep the course up to date by reflecting on what content is likely to remain fairly static and what content is likely to need timely updating. I think this distinction could actually influence some of the design strategies one implements. So maybe Tatiana, if you want to go first, you can tell us some strategies.
Yes, absolutely. So in my courses, I think about the core concepts and the theories that are fairly static over time, and I allow myself to include those in some of the asynchronous components of my courses. For example, the human resources course that I teach is blended, which means some sessions are asynchronous videos. So I intentionally pick the topics that are less likely to require frequent updates for the videos. And then I keep the content that typically needs more frequent updates for synchronous classes.
Well, let's begin with the fairly static content. Tatiana, what strategies do you use for keeping a course up to date where the static content is concerned?
Yes. So for that content that I'd like to be long lasting. So for example, videos that I would want to be able to use from one semester to another. The first thing that I've learned this by doing all the mistakes, having to re-record the videos one semester after the other. So the first thing I would say is don't put dates. We're used as instructors to put the dates on our lecture slides, right? Like the dates at the beginning and the end. Don't put the dates. Don't even put fall semester or winter semester. Maybe right now you always teach the course in the fall. Maybe that will change. So avoiding dates on all the long-lasting asynchronous content. So simple, but we don't think about it right away. So one of the things that I used to say in one of my intro video was, welcome to the winter 2020, well, let's say 2025 term. No, don't say that in your welcome video. So instead now I say, welcome to the human resources management course instead. So that way it's actually long lasting. The only other tip I would give you at this point for this is in the same line of thought, which is at the end of my modules, I like to say up next. So the students know what's the next module, what are the next steps that they need to take. But for long-lasting content, for example, asynchronous videos, I remove that part because I realize that sometimes I will change the order of the different modules. So if I put up next, well, that's not long-lasting, right? Because my course design might be changing a little bit from one semester to another.
So what you're describing here has an actual term for it, which is quite interesting, and it's making your course content evergreen. So that's an expression that means something that is continually relevant and up to date. And it alludes to, as you may have already guessed, the trees that retain their leaves or their needles throughout the year. And it really focuses on minimizing the need to frequently make these intensive revisions to a course, all the while ensuring that the content itself remains current. Something I'd advise when considering evergreening is to chunk your content so that it's structured into smaller segments that can be updated independently. This advice is advice that I give to instructors who are curious about recording videos, for example. And while my emphasis on this is usually around maintaining student attention with these short videos, it's also an important strategy for making your design sustainable for the future, for your future workload, because you can revise and replace one segment if necessary without disrupting the rest of the content of the course, for example.
Oh, that makes good sense. All right. So we have some useful suggestions for the fairly static content. What about content that's likely to change and need more timely updating?
Absolutely. So for content that is likely to change, such as current trends in organizations in my field, one of my strategies to stay current and yet manage my workload is to invite guest speakers. So I strategically bring in guest speakers for topics that are more niche in my field and that tend to quickly change and evolve. They can share the current reality with students, but without me having to take a deep dive into the topic and research it every semester. This keeps me updated with very little effort. By sitting in the lecture, by listening, by taking notes, I also stay current and updated with very minimal effort.
Well, in addition to keeping the course current and saving time by not having to do all the prep on your own, I can imagine that students find it motivating to hear different voices throughout the course. Of course, not everyone has access to formal guest speakers, such as from industry. Could a guest speaker be someone less formal, but still knowledgeable about the topic?
Yes. And I love to invite panels of former students of the course that I'm teaching to either talk about the relevance of the course in their field or to just share the reality of the field with the students, because now they've entered, they started their career, they've entered the industry, and they could share this with students. Another avenue is to invite McGill colleagues as speakers. So for example, last semester for my cross-cultural management course, I invited the EDI associate director from my faculty to talk about intergroup conflict management with my students. She has over 20 years of expertise in this field, so she was able to bring so much to the students. Another example, for my human resources course, I invited a career coach from our faculty to talk about job crafting, as this was the core topic of her PhD. So both these guests shared with me that coming to teach my students was actually a highlight for them. It was a rewarding experience, and that they would both love to do this every semester.
That sounds like such a win-win. Jasmine, how about you? Can you give us another example of a sustainable strategy that you might use to keep the course current while still managing or still helping instructors manage their workload?
Yes, of course. One sustainable strategy that I encourage is being intentional about the types of content that you want to include. So for example, we know that videos can be highly engaging, but are more time consuming to create and more time consuming to update when compared to text. I usually suggest that instructors use text-based formats for content like guidelines or resources. They can be updated more easily and quickly. And I also encourage that instructors put them in the same place in their course. Maybe that's on the same page or within the same folder so that, you only have to update that one page in your course from term to term. For concepts that are more stable or fundamental, as you said, Tatiana, videos can be a great choice and a good time investment. And I have an example of just kind of a situation I came across recently with an instructor deciding what type of content to choose for her course. She really wanted to record videos explaining her assessments of that course. And this was a little bit tricky because it's not to say that we expected the assessments in the course to necessarily change, but we do know that assessments can have many moving parts. They have due dates, and they can sometimes be a bit of a trial, for certain terms. It was also the first time that a course was offered. So it was something that I wasn't totally comfortable with. Even if we excluded the due dates, I thought, what if one of the assessments gets adjusted somewhere along the way, from term to term, and then the entire video would need to be redone. This to me was not a good format for giving assessment instructions for the course. So by strategically choosing a different format of delivery for that content based on how often that material might have to be updated, we aim to keep that balance of keeping the course current with managing the instructor workload in subsequent terms.
All right, let's get to our second piece of advice when designing courses, which is be organized. It sounds mundane. It sounds like a real no-brainer, but when you're in the thick of course design, you might not be thinking about no-brainer strategies. So let's hear some concrete ways to be organized that will help manage the workload involved in course design and in the implementation of the course, like once teaching is underway. Jasmine, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to organize your course in my courses in the learning management system in particular. So organization typically includes having consistent language and naming conventions for your content. So for example, you might choose to organize your content by week. You could include folders with all content that students need to access week to week. If this is the case, be sure to name all your folders in the same manner. Be consistent. Week 1, week 2, and so on. Organizing by week will reference time, but you might choose to organize it by type of content. So having all of your lecture slides in one folder, all of your videos, all of your practice questions. The third option is by theme or topic. So it doesn't really matter which one that you choose. I think the most important thing here is that you are consistent and your content is clear, easy and intuitive to navigate for students.
Why is that important?
Well, I feel that good organization can improve communication. So students will know where to find information. If you need to include dates, ensure that students know where to find that relevant information. So you only need to update one page. Something that might be helpful also is including a welcome or a getting started module in your course where you include all general information about the course. You can include your course outline there, maybe your course calendar or assessment calendar with due dates, link to your office hours, sign-up sheet, etc. And then in future iterations of the course, you just have to update that one section. And it's very easy for students to find all the information that they need there. I think making an effort for these things the first time around can save you effort in the long run. So it may be a little bit extra work at first, but making the navigation easy for students to follow will save you time with having to constantly direct them to things and answering questions that come in about where things are in the course.
You're right. We need the time up front to do that kind of planning, but sometimes that can be helpful because up front early on isn't when we're in the thick of teaching. And we might have a little bit more time to do that as opposed to, once the course is underway. Okay. Amazing ideas. That's great. Thank you, Jasmine. Tatiana, over to you. What strategies would you like to offer?
So the main strategy that I use to update my course's material every semester without spending hours and hours and hours researching before the start of the semester actually lies in a tip that's related to organization. I have an Outlook folder in my email that's called course material. And throughout the entire year, or, in between the start of a semester to the start of the next one for the same course, every time that I come across a new article or new materials, whether it's videos, podcasts, a report, anything that could be relevant for one of the courses that I teach, I just send the video or the podcast or the link to myself by email. And then I just put that email into my course material folder. And then a couple weeks before the start of each semester, when it's the time that I create my course outline and update it, well, then I just go straight to the emails with the title of the proper course. And then I can very easily and quickly update my course material in my course outline. To be honest with you, it takes me maybe 2 hours to update my course outline with this system because it's all in one place and it's all coded with the right course code in my emails.
That strategy oozes efficiency.
We love efficiency.
We can go to our third piece of advice then. So our third piece of advice when designing courses is to always consider pedagogy and sustainability over aesthetics and flash. Jasmine, I know you have things to say about this.
I do. I do have a lot to say about this. People are often drawn to aesthetics. And while the look, feel, and organization of a course are very important to the student experience, I just like to caution folks with getting too caught up or too lost in aesthetic details that don't necessarily serve the pedagogy or the teaching strategies in a course. So an example I've worked on multiple projects where instructors will come to me and say, I took this online course where all of the content was delivered as an interactive video package. I don't know why there's such a focus on this type of module, like a video that has these pop-up multiple choice questions and it's kind of delivered in one go, one nice little package. And I know exactly what they're talking about. It's something that seems engaging and easy to create, but firstly, it's not easy to design and create. Secondly, they're usually not that pedagogically sound in their design. They tend to be quite passive and monotonous. And thirdly, they're nearly impossible to update. So in terms of sustainability, this type of content is not ideal. Another thing that comes up or that folks often get caught up with are things like color schemes and icons and images and templates. And they can all look very impressive in a course. I agree, but it's important to always be thinking about how long it might take to build these components and how feasible it will be to update them. We're going back to the same themes here. There are worlds where an entire course design team might be dedicated to building this type of content and updating it. But in a typical context, the reality is that there's one instructor that might have a TA that's responsible for the design of the course space and the LMS.
Yeah. So I feel like it's again finding that balance. We want the course to be aesthetically pleasing, but we don't need to go overboard with bells and whistles.
And you know what? Keeping it simple, I will say, can still look really good and clean and organized. So finally, my last piece of advice, it's a good practice to be intentional about the learning technologies that you choose to use. So we have a lot of tools that are available to the McGill community. You can do a lot with them, but it's not sustainable to use as many technologies as you can just because they're available. And I caution this for a few reasons. One being that it's easier to manage fewer technologies that you're familiar with than learning many new ones and then having to update them all in future offerings. And secondly, access to tools might change over time. So it's more sustainable to choose tools that you know are likely to be more stable over time, such as my courses. Many of the technologies we have access to can serve multiple purposes. And so my advice in the spirit of sustainability and choosing technologies is that less is often more.
I would encourage instructors to take full advantage of the various features on my courses. I feel like sometimes we're not aware of all the features that are there that can help us save a lot of time. So for example, one simple one is that you can duplicate a course template on my courses to another semester. So that's very helpful the moment that you teach the same course over multiple semesters. You can simply duplicate your course, so you're not starting from scratch every time. Or you could even duplicate assignment rubrics, so that can save you a lot of time as well.
You make a good point that there are so many different features available in my courses. Instructors don't always know about them. And that speaks to the value of contacting a learning technology consultant or instructional designer, somebody who's knowledgeable about the tool to save time down the road. All right, we're going to move on to our fourth and last piece of advice, which is be efficient about gathering and incorporating feedback from students for future improvement. It's natural that we change our courses over time. Our students change over time. So Tatiana, what can you offer?
Yes. So it's absolutely true that what worked at some point may not work anymore, and what student wants, what they need to stay engaged and learn can change and evolve from one year to another. In my mind, sustainability is also about staying current, but in an efficient way. And my strategy number one to stay current is really to gather the students' feedback. So one of the ways that I collect feedback from students is through MS Form. So Microsoft Form, we have access to it through McGill to collect anonymous feedback about guest speakers or an activity we did, or just their experience in the course so far. So I use these forms throughout the semester. And the idea here is I'm trying to collect student feedback in other places than just the final course evaluation. So I try to collect feedback at different moments in the semester. So for example, maybe mid-semester at that point, maybe I had 3 guest speakers. I might send a little form that takes 30 seconds for students to fill out, where I ask their general appreciation on the 3 guest speakers that we've had so far. If I'm trying an activity, a new activity for the first time, I might send them this sort of form to get their feedback on that. I've realized that students will share more frankly with this tool, knowing that I, as the instructor, I'm the only one reading it compared to course evaluations that they know my bosses will be reading it, for example. And also the fact that they know it's anonymous, they're going to be a lot more open. And the reason I'm saying this strategy is because it's super time efficient, because I don't know if you knew this, but you can copy paste a form. So I don't have to restart the forms every semester. I can just copy paste it and then slightly modify the question. Another winning strategy to collect valuable student feedback is the stop, start, continue exercise. And here I'm going to stop and give credit to one of my colleagues in our Hotel faculty. She's the one who shared this with me. This is something I do on the very last class of the semester, where I put students in small groups, and then they need to put on a big piece of paper 3 columns: stop, start, continue. And basically, I asked them, what should I, as the instructor, stop doing to help students' success in the course? What should I start doing, and what should I continue doing? So they all write it down on the piece of paper. So I don't know who said what. And this takes only about 20 minutes of class time for them to do the exercise. And then whatever time that you as the instructor can dedicate to reading the feedback and making the changes that are the most feasible for you based on your time and your reality. So don't get me wrong. I don't implement all the feedback all the time, but sometimes it gives me an idea here and there to improve from one semester to another. And it's very efficient in terms of feedback collection.
And it's right in the moment. It's like with students in class.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's live. It's just you taking class time. And then I make sure to take some time. Actually, one of my tips is I read those not at the end of the semester. I read those before the start of a new semester when I redesign my course for the next offering.
I'd like to come back to something you said, though, about collecting feedback. And you said you don't necessarily act on everything. And I know that when instructors get feedback, it can feel overwhelming. How do you manage what to act on?
That's such a good question. It can definitely be overwhelming. One thing that I've had to learn was not to be too hard on myself. If I ask them feedback, because I'm expecting them to give me feedback, right? So there's always something you can do better. There's always something you could improve. So what I started doing is giving myself some priorities and challenges for each semester. So I give myself boundaries to work within so I don't burn out on my own, so it's not too much work for me. So for example, instead of having the pressure of redoing, refreshing all the topics and completely updating every single module every semester, I would challenge myself to update just one or two big topics every semester. And for the rest, keep it relatively similar. So in the long run, it makes it that my course is constantly evolving. It's never exactly the same from one semester to another. But in the short run, it's actually manageable in terms of time management. Another example is about 4 years ago, I started learning more about inclusivity in classrooms, and I wanted to make my classes more equitable and inclusive. But when you start researching this and learning about it, you realize that there's so much to be done, and it could really feel like a mountain to climb, and it can be paralyzing. So I gave myself the challenge to improve or try 1 or 2 strategies per semester to make my courses more equitable and inclusive, and then to build on it from one semester to another. So now I have so many strategies in place, but the workload to get there was absolutely manageable.
That aligns really, really well with the comments that we mentioned at the beginning from previous episodes that were made by Christina and Anna about being mindful about your workload presently and future as an instructor, and being able to lead and maintain your course in a healthy way, ultimately. So I can see how making those incremental changes over time can have a big impact, as you said, Tatiana, and it puts less pressure on your workload. But also on your motivation to make these changes, there's no need to change everything all at once. If you approach making changes with the mindset that you have to tear it all down and then rebuild it, you're going to get overwhelmed before you even begin. So to reiterate, I think that this is an overall theme in this episode. Keep things simple, make incremental changes, and always be mindful of your workload and your well-being as an instructor.
Indeed, we frequently tell instructors, be kind to yourself, make incremental changes, do a little bit at a time. I feel we've had a wealth of ideas today to contemplate and to ultimately implement to make course design sustainable. Maybe we'll just wrap up with a recap of the 4 pieces of advice. So first, we suggest that you keep the course up to date by reflecting on what content is likely to remain fairly static and what content is likely to need timely updating. Our second piece of advice is to be organized. Our third piece of advice is to always consider pedagogy and sustainability over aesthetics and flash. And our fourth and final piece of advice is to be efficient about gathering and incorporating feedback from students for future improvement.
it's clear that the social pillar of sustainability plays a crucial role in shaping not just your courses, but your experience as an instructor. We as a community need to prioritize the well-being, the mental health, and the workloads of instructors. I mean, we should be thinking about this for everyone, really. But in this context, being mindful of this will benefit both teachers and students and hopefully contribute to a more sustainable higher education system in general. Sustainability in course design isn't just about incorporating sustainability themes into the curriculum, but also fostering a culture of balance, of care, and well-being that supports everybody involved. So thank you so much, Tatiana, for taking the time to chat with us today about this really important topic. It's been enlightening to hear about your experience and your processes to keep sustainability in mind in your courses.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure to be with you.
And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Please remember to subscribe to Teach, Learn, Share and let others know about it. Until next time.